The Porsche Sport Podcast, powered by Porsche Centre Leeds. Test drive the new Porsche Taycan and experience Soul Electrified.
Hi, it's Kevin Estre.
It's Jörg Bergmeister.
It's Larry.
It's Timo Bernhard.
And you're listening to the Porsche Sport Podcast
with Peter Mackay
and Haley Edmonds.
Hello and welcome to the Porsche Sport Podcast, the show about all things Porsche in motorsport. It's post Sebring 12-hour weekend and we're here to chat about all things in Porsche motorsport, not just from the Sebring 12-hour, but also from the 24 hours of Daytona and the 1,000 miles of Sebring in the World Endurance Championship. It's been a very, very busy start to the season, and it's been very busy here at Porsche Sport as well. As always, we've been absolutely delighted by the guests who have come to join us on the show over the last few weeks. And to name a few, Jörg Bergmeister, Gunnar Jeanette, Mark Lieb, and many, many more. Some great chats to get yourself involved with. So make sure you're subscribed to the Porsche Sport Podcast. Get yourself on there and have a look through our back catalogue. For me, having a chat with Jörg Bergmeister about that incredible battle with Jan Magnussen at Laguna Seca in 2009. If you've not seen or heard about that, go and check that out. Gunnar Jeanette, we had two great chats with Gunnar Jeanette. One talking about his new team, AO Racing, and also his incredibly eclectic career, including driving a Porsche 935 at the age of 16. Another one as well, Mark Lieb. What a great privilege it was to chat to him as well and to hear about his background in Porsche as a factory racing driver, but also behind the scenes as well, going to study as an engineer and the role that Porsche played in that. And finally, we've launched our new segment as well, Porsche Sport Drives. This is a new part to the programme where we go into Porsche's range of incredible road cars, take them out on the road, test them, and bring our opinion of them to our listeners as well. So far, we've had two versions of the Porsche Cayenne, the regular base Cayenne, and the turbo hybrid, the truly nuts turbo hybrid, and also the sublime Porsche Cayman GT4 as well, which was a great privilege to get out on the road and test that fantastic machine. Now, joining me, Peter Mackay, today on the programme from Only Endurance is Tim Fulbrook. Tim, a very warm welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you very much for having me back on the show. Yeah, I've recovered from the lack of sleep from our double-header Sebring weekend. But yes, just about ticking and firing on all cylinders now.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it. Now, if you were to take a Porsche Sport Drive, Tim, what would you be taking out from the Porsche roster of cars that they've got? It's quite a broad roster of cars that they have at this point. What would you take out there?
I think it's probably quite an obvious one from me, but I'm a big fan of the new 992 shapes and bodywork, and obviously the GT3 car that we're seeing in racing around the world. I'm enjoying seeing that car out on track, but in the road car side of things, I really do like the new 992 911. Probably just go with the GT3 model. Clean, typical Porsche, up to date, modern, looks brilliant. Give that a blast around the country roads. I think I'd be very happy, man.
Gearbox?
Tough one. Don't know. Feel difficult on the spot.
It's not really a tough one, is it? Though, really,
is it not?
No, I mean, it's a manual. Obviously, it's obviously a manual.
Then, right.
Oh, of course it does.
Manual. We'll go.
Well,
manual.
let's get the show off on the right foot, Tim. We can't be. If you'd have said PDK, I'd be like, "Oh, thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you next time on the Porsche Sport Podcast." Do you know I've got written in my notes here? It would be a GT3 manual for me. I mean, GT3 RS is incredible and cool, and Jörg Bergmeister talked to us a lot about just how impressive that is. Bear in mind, this is a car with number plates. The GT3 RS has the same amount of downforce as an RSR with a Le Mans kit on it.
Crazy.
It's a road car, but it's PDK. So for me, it's got to be a manual. So GT3 manual, that would be mine. I think we could do one together. OE and Porsche Sport on tour. I think.
Not?
Let's do that.
North Coast 500.
Oh, well, I know the way. I know the way. I mean, we've got so much to talk about, Tim. I don't know how you keep up with it all, this new era of sports car racing. It feels like we've been talking about it as a thing in the future for so long, and then all of a sudden it's here, and it's here with a big bang. It really kicked off at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. It's about 6-7 weeks ago now. What were your kind of reflections from that race and how that went with the new era of GTP cars?
Yeah, I think, like you say, I feel like I've been waiting for that race for ages, and it was quite strange finally being here and finally seeing these cars out on track and racing. It was a race that I was obviously glued to, but I found some really interesting aspects from it. Obviously, the reliability issues and concerns that were talked about quite a lot in the lead up to this race, and almost intensified at the start of this year with some of the later tests from the cars. And I think we had that private Daytona test, and there were still issues. And you're thinking, look, this is, we're kind of getting 2-3 weeks away from the race now. Like, this is crunch time. Then I think even at the Raw, there were some issues just grumbling away. So I think that whole reliability side of things is something that we haven't really seen much in the last few years of top category racing. The DPIs have been practically invincible. The LMP1s, I guess, Toyota were clean and efficient, So across the top classes globally, it's a real almost like old school aspect, right, is about getting these cars to the finish. And we really saw that at Daytona. Great race. I really enjoyed the fighting between the drivers. I think there was a lot of chat before about getting to the end, keeping it clean, making sure we finish this first race, but get those drivers in the cars and on track, and they get a chance to sling a move up the inside, or as Nick Tandy proved, go 3 wide on the banking, complete Harry Flatters on Sunday morning. Great fighting, really enjoyed it, and look, somewhat disappointed by the news that followed the Daytona 24 regarding the result, but nonetheless, I think I really, really enjoyed the race and enjoyed seeing the cars out on track.
I think what really stood out for me was just how well IMSA nailed the balance of performance at the very first race. I mean, the difference in time. I mean, we had one practice session where 5 cars, including 3 manufacturers, was covered by a 10th. And BMW were, yes, they struggled with reliability, but they weren't miles away on pace, certainly within a window. That was one thing that just astounded me, that you could take cars that have all got different powertrains. Yes, they all go to a slightly different chassis manufacturer as well. Porsche with Multimatic, Acura with Orica, and Cadillac with Dallara. So there's quite a lot of different components in there to be used, and the end result was it was a really close race. That being said, when we got to the race, Acura had the edge. Both cars had the edge, and it was if it was going to be a race of lots of regular restarts, it seemed like it was Acura were just going to be dominant. And as you alluded to, we kind of found out after the race why the Meyer-Shank Acura was particularly good on restarts. Less said about that, the better. But on the long run, when we had a sort of 6-hour green flag running period into the morning, Cadillac actually pulled away in a really dominant position. They've got the best long pace, I think, to just plow away. And that was where it was only really on those quick restarts. But let's talk about Porsche, because this is the dream alliance. Porsche and Penske coming back together after over 15 years since the RS Spider program. Pace-wise, on one lap pace, the cars were right there. In the race, it didn't go to plan, I think, by any metric.
No, not at all. I think we had the qualifying session obviously was cut short when Nick Tandy dropped it at the bus stop, which was a massive shame because the Porsche looked quick on that one lap. And
he was on a pole lap. Yeah.
He was on a pole lap, exactly. And I think that would have been real headline news for Porsche, obviously. But had they got pole and then had the race they'd had, I think they would have been doubly disappointed. Whereas at least I think there's a position of building and real progression from here on outwards, which we've now seen at Sebring. But yeah, in the race, plagued by those hybrid issues that were spoken about pre-season. It was a shame to see those, rear their ugly head during the race. I just felt like, like you say, Acura, if you watched that race and you went, right, you can have any of these GTP cars, which one are you going to have? If you'd watched the race, you probably were going to pick an Acura first, then you were going to pick a Cadillac, and then you were going to try and bag a Porsche 963. And I think I was a little bit disappointed. I'm sure Porsche would be disappointed. The fact that they were third on the list, right? This is, like you say, the Dream Alliance. This is a car that's taking Porsche back into the top class. Driver lineup is pretty much as good as you could get ever. It's practically the dream driver lineup. I think there was a certain feeling of actually this is going to be a little bit harder than we thought, and that there's some work to do here. But there was a few moments that I think really offered that potential for the 963, like we say, the qualifying. Then I found during the race there were a number of stints or moments where actually on a par or showed pace competitive with Acura and Cadillac. Nick Tandy in the night, unfortunately before he had his off at the kink on the infield, off strategy with the leaders, he was actually really executing that very well, and the car looked to be on tabs with the leaders, the long-standing race leaders at that point. I do think the car showed its potential, but the reliability issues and some of those kind of racing incidents cost them time. And then unfortunately the problems in the morning really stopping that six having a shot at the podium.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the kind of driver lineup and the things that was there. Nick Tandy's had a year or so or away from the Porsche family. He's delighted to be back. Had a good chat with him on the morning of the race, and he was, absolutely overjoyed to be back in the Porsche fray. And it doesn't sound like he overly enjoyed what he did previously. But that being said, and we all know how good Nick is, and when it comes together, he is just he's spellbinding. But when it goes wrong quite spectacularly. And for me, he made a couple of errors, which at this level, well, as you said, they were punished. How would you assess his kind of return to Porsche? Because I don't think it was quite to the standard I think he would expect of himself.
I think it was typical Tandy, right? He's going to give it absolutely everything. There's no 99% with Nick Tandy. So it was as expected from that aspect. But I think, there were those errors, particularly that one in the night, which just added up time. I'm not really sure what caused that, what the issue was. It looked like basically just a high speed spin through the kink. I think there was a lot of promise and a lot of hope, and I think his performance was good overall, but those costly errors are, something that in this era of endurance racing can just, cost you. It's no longer like there's 5 or 6 cars and, you're going to bag good points if you have issues. We're now at the stage where an error, a single error, could drop you down the pack, when there's even more manufacturers, you could be outside a top 10 for all we know in the next coming years, not bagging yourself, P5 and P6 with a couple of issues. So, I think Tandy will bounce back, and, I think he has still a lot to offer the program. And I think we saw that, like I say, he was still quick at Daytona and still had those, those stints of real top quality pace. But a couple of errors, I think, to iron out. And I feel like he would say the same.
I think so. I think it's the thing is you don't get there aren't many sports car drivers in history who have a CV as good as his in terms of the sheer spread of races he's won. I can't think of any who's just had that broad a spectrum of wins in so many different blue ribbon races. So you can't have one and not the other. You can't have the incredible performances without the on the edge stuff, which didn't come the right way. It could there be an argument that he's having to overdrive the car? Or would it be too early to say that?
Yeah, I think. I just think in a race, I think someone would answer that and say, but Porsche have had the most amount of kilometers with this car pre-season. Someone would say, look, Porsche should know this car inside and out before they even turned a lap at Daytona on race week. But race weekends are different. Under the pressure of the race, under the situation, the clock's ticking now, the 24 hours have begun, make it happen. I think that's a very different scenario. And I think that those errors are, to some extent, just typical racing errors. I wouldn't say there's anything particularly spectacular or concerning about them. Nick Tandy just wanted to win the 24 hours of Daytona with Porsche on, the first race for the 963. Don't really blame him. I think, obviously it'd be ideal if those didn't happen, but I'd rather, and I feel like Porsche would rather see someone spin off giving it 100% than their car splutter and cough and they lose laps stuck in pit lane. I'd rather see someone giving absolute everything on track than a car that's, struggling and hitting issues. So, plenty of promise, I think, from that first race, but not the ideal start.
No, definitely not. Well, let's move on let's talk about Sebring, the race just at the weekend there. You talk about a baptism of fire. You've got a Daytona 24-hour and you think the reliability is a problem there. Well, Sebring is going to shake out any weaknesses in any car design. The teams, what really struck me was how hard the teams have been working between Daytona and Sebring in terms of actual track time. Because track time is the budgets that are going into these programs, I think, are quite significantly higher than the initial figures that were bandied around. I think there's serious wedge going into these programs to get how much it'll be over the course of the car's life. Will they hit a plateau? You never really do with race cars, but I think it will be interesting to follow that. I mean, headlines from Sebring: third win in a row for Cadillac, completely under quite bizarre circumstances. It looked like Cadillac weren't even going to be on the podium with 20 minutes to go, and then all hell break loose. I mean, pick up the story from there. What on earth happened there? Yeah,
quite an insane end to the race. We saw Porsche actually really pick up pace as the sun started to set, and I think that was a real turning point for their race. But we had a real shuffle of pit strategies right towards this final hour and a half, where there were, yellows started appearing, the classic yellows breeding yellows as well. And then we had this real sprint in this last 45 minutes where on fresh tyres, Matthew Jaminet in the number 6 and Felipe Albuquerque in the number 10 were, first of all, off the restart, trying to get past Jack Aitken in the 31 Action Express Cadillac, which they both managed to do in pretty quick succession. Jaminet's move and setup for that pass for the race lead was, I think, some of the best I've seen, off a restart, and probably one of my... I was jumping up and down and making noises at the television, obviously as impartial as I can be there. But and then following that, big issue with Sebring, not much room when things get tight with traffic. And shortly after, catching the back of the train, we have this incident where Jaminet's going for a gap. He's slowed up through T1. He's looking to the left of two GTD cars into what is turn 3. And Felipe Albuquerque's going for the same space. 2 into 1 doesn't go. All hell breaks loose. There's cars spinning, and both Porsches are taken out, as well as the number 10 Acura, giving Cadillac a gifting, really, because I don't think Aitken actually had the outright pace to win the race in
not
that
on
last
the old tyre. Not on the old tyre, no.
not the old tyre as well. And again, I think that was a gamble, not taking a new tyre, which I believe they had. And also not having Durrani in the car. I'm not quite sure why Durrani wasn't in, but I would have put him in, Mr. Sebring himself. But nonetheless, Porsche minutes away from a really impressive victory, if that had come together. And yeah, an incident that's obviously been everywhere on social media, because it was just an insane end to the race to have that happen. And big time. I mean, I'm very much of the belief it was a racing incident. Yeah. No one was really to blame. Hard racing, because why wouldn't you go for that gap when you've got 28 minutes on the clock and a chance to win the first Sebring 12 hours with these cars? Absolutely, and gonna push the edge. So crazy end to the race. And I don't think I've made some of those noises at a TV before. So made some. I definitely woke the neighbours up. But anyway.
It's interesting watching the incident from various camera angles. You could come round turn one at Sebring, which is so fast in a prototype. I mean, in the old days, in the LMP2 days, in the late 2000s, the Acura was flat through there, and all the rest of the guys were nearly flat. So even nowadays, you're still carrying huge speed. And then, like you say, there's GTD cars ahead, and Chamonix moves out to the left for the left-hander coming up, but Albuquerque came from away on the right side, away to the left, and you looking at it on the overhead camera, you could think, oh, well, how did Chamonix not see him? He's just blocked him there and driven him off the road. But that's not the case when you think about I want to talk about the vision in these cars, because, closed top prototypes are, for obvious reasons, the standard of safety now in sports car racing, have been for at least 5 years. I think they finally wittered out in 2017, I think, if my memory serves me correctly. But yes, there is an obvious safety benefit by having a closed cockpit. However, there's a trade-off for that. The vision is nowhere near what it could be. And a lot of the drivers have commented on the packaging of these GTP cars and how tight they are inside. And simply certain builds of drivers will not fit in them. And the overall vision, is that an issue or a concern that can be worked upon in a tight homologation category? What do you think?
I think it's difficult, and I think that in that situation, like you say, could Chamonix actually have seen the 10 car? Yes, no. I mean, you look at the way he's having to really check up behind two GTD cars. On what is a very narrow piece of track. I think it's quite alarming how much it narrows down between, the wide open expanses of T1 down into turn 3. It really narrows, funnels down. Yeah. And, he's going for a gap. I mean, already, if you take out the number 10 car,
it was tight anyway.
He's got his eyes focused on two GTs side by side, and he's already going to make it 3 wide. So already it's quite a hairy moment for Matthew in that situation. But taking Albuquerque, who's getting the run off T1, he's, like you say, he's out to the right, swings back into the left. He's got a big overspeed going into that. He's crossing behind Chamonix as well. So like you say, vision, if he did have that, we've seen as well in these cars, it's more common now to have the big digital, rear mirror. I do believe the 963 has that.
Yeah, but again, it's a camera, camera with a digital readout.
Mounted camera at the back. Sorry, but it's displayed almost like a rear mirror, isn't it?
Yeah,
above the top. So we're asking for those saying that Chamonix should have seen the 10. We're asking for him to take his eyes off the two side by side GT cars in front of him, to watch a screen above his head whilst trying to go for a lane on the inside, and clock that there's two headlights amongst other headlights that are darting behind him from right to left. I don't think even the best of the best, given 5 runs at it, are gonna see that happening. I honestly just think it's a completely open racing incident, and I think both drivers have said that. But like you say, is there a safety concern? Did we get away with it a little bit? Kind of not. I don't feel like vision was necessarily the issue here, And that, like you say, is there a tight homologation package to work around? And is it something that needs to be addressed? I'm sure Porsche will look at it and see if there is a way to assess that going forward. And is there something that can be done to help the drivers more so? Because at the end of the day, they lost as well, right? It's not like, Jaminet just moved over, biffed Albuquerque off and, went on to win the race. Porsche lost out, or they lost 2 cars, right? So it's a big loss for them. I wouldn't be surprised if there was something that they might do to try and sort that, or look into it, or maybe develop it. But I really don't think that at the end of the day, vision was the issue here. And I think it would be silly to say Jaminet should have seen him. I think that's quite an unfair conclusion to that incident.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because that's something that Corvette have always been one step ahead of the game in terms of the systems that run in the car that show traffic. Now, for Corvette, it's a different story, but as a GT car, they've got to keep an eye out for prototypes all the time. Ferrari's the same, though, albeit the vision's going to be easier in a GT car, but a bit more upright for a start. But the one thing's for sure is that Penske, Porsche, they're obviously a highly professional organisation, as are Penske, and Penske are renowned amongst even the top racing teams for going to the very end of the earth to find even the slightest improvement of anything in the car. Even I remember in the RS Spiders days, like the way that they would have a certain type of Velcro on their helmet so that they could attach the radio cable in a certain place where it was absolutely the easiest. And, Patrick Long told me that the day that Penske won his first ever Daytona 500 NASCAR race, he was already they saw him, they were setting up for a test at Road Atlanta. They saw him on the TV having his interview. And within a couple of hours, he walks into the restaurant because he'd jumped on his private plane and flown to Atlanta. And he's already in his RS Spider gear. And he says, right, I've got an idea about the seatbelts, guys. And he had an idea of how the seatbelts connections, how there was half a second in a pit stop of changing the way that the belt buckles went in on the seatbelt. And that was, that's the team owner who's coming up with that. So that's the kind of organisation they are. I think that if they think there's a way to improve, I could see that happening if they're allowed within the rules. That's the thing. The one thing that says for me, though, Tim, we've seen crazy finishes at Sebring before. It very much is almost a trademark of that. We see them at places like Road Atlanta, Petit Le Mans as well. But it seems that in this new era, you're going to have to really get your elbows out and get quite fierce and quite nasty, whether that be on or off the track, as we've seen. We talked about the Marchand Acura, how they were caught manipulating the tyre data. Obviously, that's against the rules and they were penalised for it. It seems that in this era, the more competitive it gets, the more they call Formula One the Piranha Club. Well, I don't think we're going to have all that different a situation here because the stakes are just getting higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're spot on there. From a fan's perspective, though, right? As someone who loves this motorsport, great. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I'll take that.
Yeah.
So what if Porsche, BMW, Acura, Cadillac have to have a fight at the end of the race? I'll absolutely take them knocking each other's wheels off. Like, great. Obviously within a limit. I don't want some absolute outrageous bottom split iRacing dive bombs. But, that's what it's all about. And I think, we're two races into this in IMSA. The cars are new. Technology is still being adapted. We're still ironing out some of those issues. They want to win it as badly as they ever will do, and that's just great to see that even in these early stages, just being that first new era GTP car to win Sebring, win Daytona, win wherever means so much to them that they will, like you say, leave a bit of paint on the other cars and have some pretty audacious moves in traffic and things like that. Obviously, there's a line to it, like I say, but I'll absolutely take it as a fan. Bring it on.
And you think about it, the Jaminet was going there toe-to-toe with Albuquerque, who's... Philip Albuquerque has been in prototypes for a long time. Jaminet has been in prototypes for almost no time at all, certainly in a race situation. That's really, it's kind of, I know he's had dabblings before, but really nothing of any kind of substance. This is getting thrown straight into the deep end, and that skill takes a bit of time as well. It's interesting. One point I would like to make, I think, is that I think also a certain degree of needle between the teams is great for the overall show, great for the overall story. Not where it boils over and gets nasty. That there's no need for that, but a little bit of needle in competition is great. And you look at the IMSA have released a kind of documentary series called Win the Weekend, which follows each race and what have you. And the last episode, I think it's episode 3, it's had 2 million views in 4 or 5 days. Now that's well beyond what they've probably had in the last 10 years in terms of like race broadcasts, in terms of what views on YouTube. So, as we go into this with those sorts of numbers, Tim, we're reaching a new level of, I would say we're clearly reaching new groups of people which we did not reach before, on pure numbers.
Absolutely, a numbers basis, and I think that does come with the brand involvement. I think that really does heighten that. It's an obvious one for someone who, maybe just likes Porsche road cars to see a Porsche race car and go, oh yeah, that's in the top category, whatever, and get hooked on it. I think that's what the groups we're starting to access. But, we talk about motorsport being marketing, right? We talk about it as being, the fastest advert out there for these teams. And I think if you showed anyone from any of the brands racing that the mini doc series from, the last episode from IMSA got 2 million views, they'd be very, very pleased with that. And I think they'd really feel they were in the right place. And I think that's what's vital. A lot of these teams, manufacturers are talking about being in the right places, putting their product in front of people, putting their name in front of people. I think part of that as well is this hybrid regulation as well, allowing them to have that crossover between, combustion and electric technology. Okay, yeah, it's spec, but it's still part of that whole brand messaging. I think it's just a really brilliant time to be a manufacturer with the opportunity to go racing in this top category. And I think, like you say, to be accessing those new groups of people, to be getting that sort of viewership is only going to solidify, their belief in their decision to go racing.
No question. I mean, last point on GTP, and I think this is something that will please the manufacturers, because cars blowing up on air is that's the opposite of marketing. That's bad. Just like a tire falling off the rim or something like that. Reliability, it was a question mark at Daytona. There were reasons that you could say, yes, it was a problem, for Porsche and BMW, they experienced it, but Cadillac and Acura probably came away from Daytona going, that went pretty well. And then Sebring, which is by far harder to do 12 hours at Sebring than it is to do 24 hours really anywhere else. And the cars, there were cars that were taken out by accidents. And of course, the Chip Ganassi Cadillac had one brief issue that could have happened on any type of racing car, but there was no MGU issues, no battery issues, none of that. It was clean in terms of reliability. So already here we are, race 2, and it looks like, touch wood, the teams have just nailed that reliability challenge, which is spectacular, I think.
Yeah, and like you say, at Sebring of all places, right? This is
rattles.
12 hours of Sebring is an entire season in another championship. It's incredible. I think Porsche would probably come away from the weekend the most pleased with how their car performed on a reliability front as well. I think they'd be pleased with that in terms of the consistency of the car. Obviously, we saw Cadillac have an issue, the fire that I'm sure we could have seen on, like you say, on another car. The BMW 24, I can't quite remember what the reason was for that car not finishing, but I know that stopped. That had that spin with Philip Egg and then was scuppered later on as well. But yeah, we're not talking about cars spending 25 minutes in pit lane having a hybrid unit changed. We're talking about cars having unfortunate issues or, something that's a little bit, typical racing kind of problem. And yeah, I do firmly believe that Porsche probably looking at the 963 after Sebring going, actually, the package is good. And we actually we've made progress since Daytona. We made real steps forward. And I think this is to then have that last 2 hours of the race, the pace that the 963 showed, when the darkness set in at Sebring, I think that's only going to be setting that, despite the incident, is only going to be getting the team excited of where this car can go and what it can do.
I think it's a great way to close off. Certainly the Sebring 12-hour and IMSA with GTP. We'll come back to GTP, of course, with World Endurance Championship later. Sticking on Sebring 12-hour, GTD Pro, at Daytona, it couldn't have really gone a great deal worse for Porsche. They come out with a brand new 992 GT3R, which is a bigger engine. It's got better aero. It's more drivable. It looks $1 million. And it's very much an evolution of the previous concept. It's not a radical change. And then all of a sudden, the car's 3 seconds off the pace, and you've got Kevin Estre being passed by bronze drivers. I mean, it was all just a bit bizarre, Tim, wasn't it, with the way that things came out of the gate at Daytona as far as an overall picture was concerned?
Yeah, bizarre. Very strange to see that. Quite painful as well, to see it so unbalanced and so strange. Yeah, like you say, bizarre is just the word to use for that 992, GT3 debut. It was really sad to see because, we had all this hype about the new GTP cars, but I was equally excited for some of the new GTDs showing up, like you say, for the Porsche, for the Ferrari 296 as well, for the next Evo Lamborghini Huracan. I was really interested to see how these new cars would get on. Basically, Porsche didn't get any coverage in the GTD class. It was a real shame to see. So, yeah. It was nice to see that change at Sebring, and I don't think it could have. The script couldn't have been more flipped if it tried. Well,
that's the thing is that, but it took it. There was a big. I mean, a lot coming out of Daytona. There was a lot of teams who have or teams who have a customer, shall we say, who puts the money into the program. Let's not beat around the bush. These programs exist because usually one individual wants to do it, and a team sells that service to them, and they pay their money and they come and race. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's a great way for young professionals to gain employment and as drivers also. I mean, the whole business model works perfectly. However, if you're putting however much the budget is to do Daytona, I've heard as much as $1 million to do Daytona, which is scary when you think about it. But you've got guys who are putting that amount of money in, and they are effectively shown that they have zero chance because there is a limitation on them in terms of the balance of performance. Now, that, of course, I think it's a good approach from IMSA that when there's a brand new car, they go on the conservative side. And then build the balance of performance up rather than let somebody win by 5 laps in the first race and then bring them back down again. I think their approach is right. But of course, there was another test where the same at Sebring after Daytona, where the same thing happened again. And some of the teams felt like their questions weren't being answered. The First Form Right car, backed by Ryan Hardwick, has decided to cut their program down. MDK we didn't see at all at Sebring. So the fact that the race went the way it did, it was, I bet almost IMSA almost be breathing a sigh of relief to say, look, our concept does work, but they lost a few people in the wind in the meantime.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you say, the IMSA strategy is often to put the car lower down and build it up into competition, which I don't disagree with that. I do think that, however, how off it was at Daytona would lead to potentially a bit more of an immediate response and a bit more of a, an eagerness to get that gap, that quite significant delta reduced. I'm not saying Porsche should suddenly just be handed pace, because that's not the name of the game here. That's not what it's about. But we'd like to see those cars, back towards things. I think you make a really valuable point as well about the funding system for these cars. The guys paying for it, they want return on their investment, right? They're pumping in a lot of money.
Or at least a fair shake. Just a fair shake will do. That's all they're asking for. Yeah.
All they want is to be there, to be driving these cars in these races, and they want to have a shot at winning. Of course, that's why they're competitive people. But they're putting in essentially their hard-earned money, right? So I think it's unfair to see people. I've seen some responses of people saying, about Porsche crying about it and, get over it, stop playing the BOP games. They're going to come back and suddenly rinse the field with it, and they've just been playing it. It's not the name of the game at all. That's not what's going on.
Not when you're selling a $750,000 race car, right, exactly, to 5 or 6 independent teams who have paid their money, and they go, my car now.
Right. Yeah, brand new. There's a reason why it's Porsche customer racing. It's customers. This is representing the customers. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very, very important that maybe people who are watching IMSA for the first time realize that a lot of these cars, like you say, are privately funded. This isn't, being paid for, by a manufacturer. But yeah, look, back towards the pace, definitely at Sebring. I wouldn't have said the Porsche was the fastest car, but you don't, that's the idea of balance of performance. You're not meant to have an outright fastest. I think the FAF team, for them to get the result they had at Daytona, considering the car they had, absolutely solidified just how amazing an organization that is, and how well they can run a car at these big endurance races. Fast forward to Sebring, and that ability to execute is copied across, and they pull off a fantastic win, and a fully deserved one considering the start of this year.
Oh, I think it just, to me, it comes to FAF as an operation, and I think how their tenacity is incredible. Daytona was just soul destroying for them, absolutely soul destroying for them. They made their point. I think they made it fairly. They didn't throw mud at the series. They just said, we're not happy, but we trust that the series will sort this, and we'll carry on, and we'll be there. And I believe Steve Bortolotti had to continually confirm that FAF were going to be at Sebring. He says, yes, of course we're going to be there. And they come out, and when they get a sniff of a win, they make it happen. They have building up a reputation, I think, for just making the very most of every opportunity. And if there is a chance to win, they will take it. But let's talk about that last stint from Pilet, Patrick Pilet. This is now his third Sebring win in 5 years. That last stint, how on earth did he do that, Tim, to get that car? Was it an hour and 50 minutes on one tank of fuel?
No idea. I'd love to weigh his right foot and just see how light it is. Incredible driving. I think we had that last segment of the race was fascinating. I spent, I'm like a proper endurance racing fan. I've got multiple screens on the go. I've got onboard cameras, and I spent a lot of time riding the 79 Merc as it chased down the number 9. And I believe it was Engel was catching Vanthoor. And then Vanthoor just was like, actually, you know what? Sorry about this, mate. I'm just going to put 5 seconds on you a little bit, just stretch out the gap. And it was really impressive seeing that car and Vanthoor set up this last, segment of the race with a really great stint. Then hands over the baton to Pilet, who's able to somehow stretch that tank. Still not quite sure how. He's obviously helped a little bit by the yellows, but still under pressure from what has been the best GT3 car in 2023. The AMG Merc's been the GT3 to have globally, not just in IMSA, globally.
Yeah, good point.
And from a car, like you say, and we've spoken about, was at the bottom of the pile at Daytona, to then keep that car ahead of the fastest GT3 this year. impressive, really incredible stuff. And he was really doing some great things with that car. Rode on board in that final hour with the 79, and every restart was executed really well, and he was clever in traffic, able to pick a moment to put a car between him and Junkadea in the WeatherTech Merc. Just really well thought out, execution of that final stint. Really well managed. Brilliant. Just cherry on the cake for what was, a great bounce back for Faf.
It was. I mean, you look at where they've come from. 5 years ago, nobody not knew who they were. Of course, people knew what they were, but they were very much in their infancy in IMSA. And then all of a sudden now they've won championships, they've won Daytonas, they've won, they've won Sebrings. It's been remarkable. Are they beginning to establish themselves as a true great Porsche team in historical terms? We had, for me, Flying Lizard were the ultimate team, certainly in North America. Peterson, White Lightning, Alex Job, and many others in Europe as well. But are they? To me, that they're already putting themselves towards the realm of a Flying Lizard. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think I know that in the future I will look back at the late 2010s and the 2020s as kind of my era, if you like, of endurance racing. And I think the Faf GT3 Porsche is going to be a car I remember. They've won championships, they've won the big races. They've had a livery that's spoken about just as much as the car. Those are things that Flying Lizard and all those customer teams have got as well. They really do have that. And yeah, I think it's
and they're a dealership team, really, when you think about it. They're a dealership team, a very, very good one. But they're a dealership team.
Very good one. Yeah, but again, proper sports car racing, right? These guys sell the cars, sell Porsches. They race Porsches. That's just through and through. Plus, they've had, obviously the best of the best when it comes to Porsche GT factory drivers, representing them. And that just, gets the juices flowing a little bit more when it comes to it. But yeah, completely agree. I think, say Faf were to stop racing next year, it doesn't matter. I think we'd still look back at their time and be really impressed by them and what they've managed to achieve. And I think they'd be heralded as, one of the strongest customer teams in the 21st century for sure.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. Totally agree. Indeed, in a way, they're almost like a modern day kind of Brumos in a way. Is that obviously Brumos were a dealership team, whereas Flying Lizard was very much set up as a pure sports car team in a way, which I think is cool. So we move on to Long Beach on the 15th of April, always one of my favourite races of the year, 100-minute sprint. And these new GTP cars around Long Beach is quite a terrifying proposition, actually. But going into that, we've got Mathieu Jaminet and Nick Tandy in car number 6, fifth in the championship, and car number 7, Felipe Nasr and Matt Campbell 6th. Porsche go in bottom of the GTP manufacturers' points, so very much work to do there. Faf Motorsport, they go in 3rd in the championship with their number 9 car with Patrick Pilet and Klaus Bachler. And now in GTD, the hopes now pin in a full season sense. The hopes now pin we're going to lose the number 16 Wright Porsche, which you could argue was the strongest chance for the championship there. So it's between now the 77 Volt Porsche, the 2 Kelly Morse Riley cars, and the number 80 AO Racing car. So GTD is going to be an uphill battle from now to the end of the season in IMSA. But I, for one, cannot wait to see how the rest of this season pans out as well. IMSA is always delivering the goods. Now, it wasn't just IMSA at Sebring at the weekend, hence the name Super Sebring. We had the World Endurance Championship opening up their new era as well, the hypercar category. Now, we've had hypercars for a season or two now, but this is where we've now got the convergence, as has been promised. And you've got the hypercars, which are built very much to a set of regulations founded by the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, the organisers of the World Endurance Championship and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But in IMSA, they've very much championed the LMDH type of rule set. Slightly different rule set, but in theory, the two types of cars should be able to be balanced together and race all on the same sort of similar lap time. All sounds very rosy and simple in theory, Tim, but practice was a little bit different. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it was a real fascinating race to see. And like you say, it's convergence is something that we're witnessing play out. And it's, like you say, it sounds all rosy, written down and spoken out loud, but actually it's some proper hard craft must go into this, and some real difficult work to balance what are very different concepts, different engines, different powertrains combinations, chassis, even tyre size when it comes down to WEC. There's a real lot to take into consideration. I think one thing that I did actually agree with in terms of the convergence system this year at Sebring was the idea of running the LMDH cars that competed in both, so Cadillac and Porsche, giving them the same balance of performance statistics. I think that was a really just a great way of making sure that GTP and hypercar were, at least we hope, the two categories, I mean, not the two concepts, two categories were somewhat level. And I think we did see that in the races, that they were fairly close on pace. But yeah, I think there was still a gap between the the factory LMH cars, the Toyota and Ferrari, and then the Cadillac and Porsche were next on that pace list. There was still a little bit of a gap there. Sure, that's something that will close up. You see the BOP change at Portimao and that run through to Le Mans. So I'm hoping that this next set of balancing measures sees that gap close. But actually, I do think that there was some moments where we saw fairly, parity between the two concepts, if you like, particularly when we saw the number 6 car going head to head with the 50 Ferrari. I think that was quite an interesting battle between the two very different concepts of how to build a car for this top class. But yeah, I think there is a little bit of a gap there to close. And I'm sure, and I hope that will be done in the coming couple of races.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I mean, the Toyota's fastest lap in the race, the car number 7 was a 1:48.3. However, car number 8, Toyota, did a 1:47.8. So that was the fastest lap of the race. Curiously, although they were on pole in the race, they were 0.6 of a second off the fastest Toyota in the 50 car and 1 second off in the 51 car. Cadillac were actually only 0.8 seconds off the fastest Toyota, but Porsche, slightly different, 1.7 seconds off in terms of the 5 car and 1.5 seconds off in terms of the 6 car. So curiously, how we're seeing a little bit of a spread in terms of the overall performance. And you have to, would you say, Tim, that IMSA have nailed this BOP balance of performance straight out of the gate, or do they have an easier job?
I think to some extent they have an easier job, right? They've got 4 cars built to the same regulation, 4 LMDH cars. And I think they started off with the right approach at Daytona by giving them a level playing field. Everyone's got the same weight, everyone's got the same power available. Almost like the first race of the British touring car season, but when we had ballast, before success ballast was applied, this is your race, and you kind of got to see who had the best package, and then everyone kind of got leveled out from then onwards. That's what it felt like, and I really liked that approach. Do you think it's more difficult in the WEC to balance them straight off the bat? I do think that's a really tough ask, and I don't think it was ever going to be spot on the first go. I mean, it would be wrong to assume that we were going to have a completely, everyone running lap times within 0.2 of each other. I do wonder though whether there are some not teething problems, but I wonder if the WEC team for Porsche is still getting up to speed with this car and still really getting on top of some of the issues. I know it's something that you've noted down about the tyre life with the car. That was something that I really think scuppered their race in the 1,000 miles, and it was so obvious. It was
really, a puncture. It was horrendous. Yeah,
it was so obvious on the coverage that it was just fundamental tyre life and grip that was really, really hampering them. Funnily enough, the same issue that I think helped them at the end of the 12 hours, the ability to over switch on the tyre, in the restart in the cooler conditions at night. The Porsche looked great off the restarts, but in the heat of the day, in the 1,000 miles, where you're trying to potentially double stint the tyre as well, that's just really holding them back. And I mean, you saw the end of the stint that Van Toor did when he was trying to get out of the car. I mean, you almost wanted to just help him get around or get to the end of it, or just get out of the car. It just looked a nightmare. And I think that issue cost them a lot of time, a lot of pace. And I feel like that's something that they themselves are going to iron out or get used to or learn how to work around, work out the limits of the car, how it uses the tires, but also from a driver's perspective, how would they need to drive, how they need to approach the race. Do they need to give those, first 5 to 10 laps that are now already different with the lack of tire warmers anyway in this year for WEC, but actually conserve even more so in the early part of the stint. I don't know. I feel like that particular aspect, the tyre problem, is something that they will learn to deal with, and that could bring them closer in terms of stint pace to the other cars in the class. And I think overall, that ability to maximise the tyre is something that Toyota are obviously going to be doing very well. And if they're the benchmark, then that's something Porsche's got to work towards.
How we've now seen but like you say, both the IMSA side of things, we've had 36 hours of racing, and in WEC we've had 1,000 miles or 8 hours roughly. How worried do Porsche have to be? Because yes, Sebring we had a particularly hot Sebring this year, which doesn't help tyre wear. Sebring's surface is renowned for being tough on tyre wear. But two factors. One, Porsche have been quite publicly one of the busiest in terms of testing. Now, whether they're doing that on their IMSA tyre or their WEC tyre is maybe one to consider. But also, as we go to Portimao, we saw in previous meetings at Portimao, huge chunks coming out of the GTE car tyres. Portimao is probably as hard, if not harder, on tyres in terms of the loading on the cars. So how worried do Porsche have to be at this stage with that? Because the pace, I think, one lap pace can almost be effectively manipulated by balance of performance. But tyre wear is a lot harder to fix that, I suppose, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. That's that's almost a question of the package itself, the car, the setup. We've seen from a WEC perspective, we saw Glickenhaus when they first showed up at Portimao with their new car. That thing absolutely ate rubber, like it just chewed through it. And that's a track, like you say, that's really going to highlight that. I think they're going to need to get on top of this because, like you say, Portimao is not only a potentially high deg, high load circuit, it also can be pretty darn hot in Portugal if it wants to be as well. On a proper sunny day in the Algarve, that can be roasting there. Got a real push of the tyre and of the car's ability. No doubt they're going to be, that's going to be something very high up the list to work on. And if the progress we've seen between Daytona and Sebring is anything to go by, I wouldn't be surprised to see them show up at Portimao and, really have a grip on it, and have turned things around to some extent. But begs the question, like you say, if we do get to Portimao and the 963 is having that same issue, and as I would say, to the extent that it was seen in Sebring, that's when I think we start to think that there's actually an issue here that Porsche really have got to focus on, because making the tyres last is obviously vital. I'm doing a Will Buxton here. Obviously vital to a double stint, right, in your racing, but especially with tyre limitations as well. So it's not just as easy to just throw tyres at it all the time. You can't just get away with not making it through the double stint you need to make it through, right? So there's a real opportunity to just lose massive amounts of time in the race. And like I said earlier, if one issue leaves you in pit lane for a lap longer than you need to be, you're no longer just fighting for a top 5. You're outside the top, 8, 9, right down to the bottom of the order. Losing those valuable seconds on track could swap you out of position in terms of, just track position, then needing to pit more often, or unable to just literally make the tyre last the stint. It's just free time, right? It's just free time gone away. Portimao, if they haven't got on top of it, to summarise my point, because I've been blabbering, Portimao, if they haven't got on top of it by then, or at least seen progress, then I think that really moves up the priority list for Porsche.
Yeah, I think so. And that's where the worry probably kicks in, because with a homologated car, it's completely different to in the past, where you could throw parts at it and throw new aero concepts at it and whatever. They've not got that. They've got jokers though, don't they? Don't they have a? Yeah. How many jokers is it that they can play?
So I believe it's 5 across the entire homologation cycle. Yes, and those have to be proven. They have to justify them to the WEC, ACO, to the basically almost re-homologate it, justify why these changes are being made. And a lot of them are linked towards reliability as well. So I know Toyota have used up jokers on trying to improve the package under the car as well as outside. So yeah, look, there's not much wiggle room. Yeah. A big headache for Porsche, I think, off the back of Sebring, and something that I think the drivers will be very concerned about at the moment as well.
I agree. I agree. Well, let's move on then to our final topic of discussion, and that's GTE in the World Endurance Championship. The last year of GTE and the last year of our beloved RSR, and the more as the months tick by, knowing that it's going to be going away, the more you just love that incredible machine. And as Gunnar Jeanette said to us in his chat, he says, for them as a team, AO, they're racing in IMSA and in World Endurance Championship and at Le Mans too. He says, for me as a Porsche, spent my whole life with Porsche, it's very, very rare to get to drive a mid-engine 911. They don't come around very often. He drove the 911 GT1 all those years ago, and you could argue maybe that the 935 was like that, but even then it's still more rear bias. So it's very, very rare. RSR is one of those things, and it's renowned as being a pretty tough car to master. And kind of summarising the results before we get into what actually occurred. Corvette Racing win, a factory team in the GTE AM category. That's a discussion for another day. But Dempsey Proton Racing come home in second. A great charge through the field for them. But I want to really focus on this topic about the performance of particularly Sarah Bovey and the Iron Dames team. Starting with qualifying, Tim, that was an enthralling qualifying session with Sarah and Ben Keating, who is renowned as the best bronze driver in the world at this, certainly who's competing anyway. There are others. You look down the list of bronzes here and you're going, what, Johnny O'Connell, really? And everybody's wondering when we're going to see these guys coming out of retirement as a bronze driver. But in terms of active bronze drivers, Ben's, I think it's not really arguable that he's the top driver on pace. But Sarah's changing that narrative right at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't spell benchmark without Ben. But yeah, very good. And I think the point here is
hats with that made up. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Well, copyright me. I need some royalties for that. But I think crucial to the point here is that's I believe Iron Dames' third pole in 4 races. But first race with the RSR and their first pole position. And like you say, I think it's really underestimated and undervalued switching switching concepts. It's a very different car. These guys have been running, Bovie Gatting and Rahel Fry have been running with the Ferrari Cross Championship. The GTE and GT3 488 are very similar. And they've done Spa 24 Hours. They've done, the longer GT World Challenge races. They've had a lot of time with that concept and that car, that package. Mm-hmm. Now, to basically unlearn that and then relearn what is probably one of the more aggressive GTE cars.
Yeah.
Massive challenge that I think even a professional driver would, take a little while to get their heads around. To see them step in and basically put in one of the qualifying performances of, the last 2-3 years was spectacular, out of the box as well. And Sarah Bovie just putting in a brilliant performance, really measured qualifying laps. It just looked on top of it, and that was really just impressive to see. And like you say, out qualifying Ben Keating's great
by
doing
4
it in a
tenths.
car, 4 tenths, doing it in a car you're brand new to, and then also being other drivers that have been driving their car for potentially a year or so, just adds to the achievement there. So very impressive.
She was 1.6 seconds quicker than the nearest RSR in qualifying. 1.6 seconds. I mean, Sarah's still wait. We're definitely gonna get her on the show because her story is incredible. She's tried for years trying to keep any kind of a racing career going and doing drive along days and all kinds of things, and just never got the breaks at all. And then the Iron Dames, her career was virtually over, and Iron Dames discovered her and brought her into the program, and she's just been a revelation. There were threats for her driver grading to be upgraded, which of course would have scuppered the whole thing. Likewise, Michelle Gatting, those didn't happen. And I think with that in mind, you look at also the overall lap times. Yes, the race didn't, was for Iron Dames. They were fighting for the win. They were right in the heat of the battle for the win. They could have easily won that race in terms of the position they were in. It was a great fight with Corvette. But they ended up finishing P8 because they had an issue. Rahel ran off, ripped the back splitter off, and that was just bad luck. But you look at their pace, the best lap of the race for all the other RSRs, Iron Dames' car was right there. That means that Rahel, who's the quickest driver in the car, is within a couple of tenths of factory drivers. So my point I'm coming to here, Tim, and I think it's an important one to finish off on, and it fits in nicely with who our guest that we're speaking to tomorrow is, Michelle Gatting, part of the Danes team. Question for you: can they win Le Mans in their category?
Yeah.
I'm Scottish and I feel like putting a fiver on them because just where they fit in each part of the grading, Sarah's the bronze, Michelle is the silver, Rahel is the gold. They've all proven that they are up the top of that bracket in each sense.
Why not? And I think, in conversations about driver grading, I do wonder whether this is the last year potentially that we see this grouping together.
Yeah.
But I think that they are now really such a well-oiled team, operating very well, performing very well. And I don't see why they couldn't go on to win Le Mans. I would expect them to be in the championship fight all season in WEC. I'd expect them to be podium regulars. And I think they would be disappointed if they weren't, actually. I think after this Sebring round, I think they'd be very disappointed if they weren't bouncing back next time out in Portimao. But a track that they won at, actually, didn't they, at the end of last year in ELMS, I believe?
Yeah.
So, it's a good circuit for them.
Which made it to the BBC World Service, by the way. My mother-in-law told me it was on the BBC World Service. So it just shows you what it means.
Yeah.
And to me, it's completely different from an F1 Academy or W Series where they have girls all in one category. I don't agree with that at all. I think what Deborah Meyer and her husband Claudio have done with Iron Dames is incredibly generous, first of all, to be able to back such a program that puts, fast female drivers in a proper car with a proper team against the top competition. No excuses, no nothing. Just there's the car. There's the opportunity that you haven't had in the past. We've created that, but you've got to go and do it on the top stage, and they have done. Spa 24-hour win in class, ELMS win, and I don't think the WEC win is very far around the corner at all.
No. And I think it sums up the conversation we've just been having. We've been talking about their race pace, their performance, whether they're winning the races, how well they're driving the car, in terms of adapting to a new concept. We're not talking about their gender, and they're doing an amazing job at proving that ultimately that doesn't matter. If you're a good driver, you've got a good team around you, and you can, you've got racing instinct and talent, you can do it. And I think we're about to see that really hammered home this year. A Le Mans win, I don't think it's off the cards. I really think that's something that they could achieve, especially with it being GTE AM only. I think there's, that ability to feel real ownership of owning the GTE class that's there. Why not? I think there's quite
It's a shame we're only going to have them for a year in the Porsche family. They're off to Lambo next year, basically, as we know.
Exactly. You've got to milk it. You've got to milk it whilst you can.
Another kind of bonus point, if you like, look at Corvette Racing. Corvette Racing have been as factory teams get for 25 years, and Le Mans has been their annual trip across the Atlantic to give us all a good kicking, and most of the time they do. And of course, that opportunity to basically run a factory team, a pro team, is gone now. It doesn't exist, certainly until, it doesn't exist at Le Mans anymore. So Corvette Racing doesn't mean that they've not bothered. They're still going to be at Le Mans. Corvette Racing is still Corvette Racing, but it's in what is a Pro-Am category. So do you think that Corvette are going to set a precedent here? Are we going to see more involvement in the impact that, say, Ferrari put in, Aston Martin put in, Porsche put in? Because given that that's their, for some of those manufacturers, Aston Martin's a good example. That's the only arena they play in WEC and in Le Mans. So do they add a bit of extra influence in there now that that's their kind of only playground, regardless of how the driver lineups are put together?
Yeah, definitely. 100%. I think, Corvette are in a Pro-Am category, but I don't think the team running the car are anything but as pro as it gets. So, that's still very much a factory effort with, a couple of lower ranked drivers in, which makes, I think, Iron Dame's performance at Sebring even more impressive, and their ability to, run on pace with Corvette and, be right up there and out-qualify them. Ben Keating, going into that qualifying session, is going to have the best prepared Corvette CAR GTE, going into that session. So, I think we will see an upped factory involvement. I think that's because ultimately these are the cars that the factories sell. This is how they make their money. And so they want to not only attract new customers, but impress the ones they've got, give them the backing they can, whether that's, professional factory grade mechanics, engineers, whatever kind of assistance, not in the car, outside of it, to help them, keep a customer happy or attract someone else from another brand or another, completely new organization. Undoubtedly, I think we'll see that increased factory involvement at that level. Corvette's going to be the benchmark for that. So if anyone manages to topple them from the top spot, and especially if it's an organization as impressive as the Iron Dames and Iron Lynx in general, I think we're in for a hell of a ride in GTE this year.
Yeah, roll on Le Mans, I say. Roll on Le Mans. It's going to be fantastic. Well, closing up on that one, our temporary members of the Porsche family, the Iron Dames, one of the stars of the Iron Dames lineup, Michelle Gatting, is coming to chat with us tomorrow, and that episode will come out in due course on the Porsche Sport podcast. On behalf of us all here, thank you so much for tuning in to the programme. We hope we've brought us all up to date on everything World Endurance Championship and IMSA and how Porsche are getting on in those various categories. Tim Philbrook, very big thank you from us all here at Porsche Sport for bringing the only endurance knowledge to the podcast. We very much appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be back, Peter. It's given me something to do on a Wednesday afternoon.
And how do people get now? Yeah, I don't know why I should be saying this because you've got far more followers than we could possibly dream of. But humour us. Where do people go to follow you on the various Only Endurance channels? Yeah, sure. So you'll find me on Instagram and Twitter. Those are my two kind of primary platforms. At Only Endurance. Drop me a follow. If you've ever got any questions about endurance racing, be it the top classes in IMSA and WEC, or whether you want to know about anything GT3 related or beyond, drop me a message, hit me up in the comments. I'll do my best to respond and help clear things up for you. But yeah, a really impressive weekend for me at Sebring. It's great to see so many fans and people getting involved with Only Endurance content. And yeah, thank you very much for my 5-second plug, Peter. There you go. You're very welcome. Those come for free. Well, thank you so much to you all for listening to us here on the Porsche Sport podcast, and we shall see you next time. Goodbye.
The Porsche Sport podcast, powered by Porsche Centre Leeds. Test drive the new Porsche Taycan and experience soul electrified.